Chainsaws screaming at 6 a.m. shattered my sleep. I run outside. Brenda Maxworth, HOA queen, is barking orders at her husband Dale, who's operating his bulldozer straight through my family's 1924 hand-hewn oak fence. Posts my great-grandpa cut during the Dust Bowl. Splinters everywhere, century-old wood turned to garbage in minutes. She's filming herself on her phone, grinning. Finally, this selfish rancher's illegal barrier is gone. Public access to our trail now. Diesel smoke chokes the air as Dale shuts off the machine and climbs down to high-five her. She waves fake easement papers like a trophy. I stand there, phone recording her celebration on my land. She thinks she just stole my heritage. She has no clue I've got the original deeds, and every HOA road on this property runs through my deeded right-of-way. Tomorrow, every single gate gets padlocked, permanently. Drop your location in the comments if you've ever dealt with an HOA tyrant, because what happened next turned her victory into pure regret. Let me back up and explain how Brenda Maxworth became the most hated woman in 3 counties, because this morning's fence destruction was just her latest move in a 5-year war she thought she was winning. I'm Jake Whitmore, 52, third-generation rancher on 200 acres of prime Texas grassland that's been in my family since 1924. My great-grandfather carved this spread out of nothing during the Dust Bowl, hand-cutting those oak fence posts while folks were literally starving. The cattle trail he built connecting our ranch headquarters to the north grazing pasture, that's been our lifeline for a century. My wife Sarah and I raised our daughter Emma here, teaching her to ride before she could walk, showing her how to read the weather in cloud formations. Emma's 22 now, finishing her agricultural law degree at A&M, planning to come home and help modernize our operation. Sarah always joked that Emma got my stubborn streak and her mother's brains, dangerous combination in a rancher's daughter. Then, 2019 hit us like a tornado. Riverside Estates sprouted up on the adjacent 300 acres like mushrooms after rain. Some Dallas developer bought the former cotton farm and slapped down 200 McMansions with names like Heritage Manor. Laughable, since they bulldozed actual heritage to build it. The smell of fresh concrete and chemical lawn treatments replaced the sweet scent of native wildflowers that used to bloom there every spring. But here's the critical part. Our cattle trail ran directly through what became their main entrance. We held a legal easement dating to 1987, when the previous farmer sold his land, but specifically preserved our access rights. 20-page document, notarized, filed with the county. Rock solid. Enter Brenda Maxworth, HOA president and professional neighborhood terrorist. 48 years old, moved down from Tulsa after what I later learned were financial irregularities with her previous HOA presidency. Married to Dale Maxworth, whose construction company Maxworth & Sons mysteriously won every HOA repair contract without competitive bidding. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Brenda had that special brand of suburban entitlement, where a plastic name tag convinced her she was empress of a 200-house kingdom. The kind of person who measures grass height with rulers and calls it maintaining community standards. The harassment started immediately. Facebook posts about agricultural odors ruining their wine tastings. Notes on my truck about unsightly farm equipment disturbing their peaceful residential aesthetic. She actually filed noise complaints about my roosters crowing at dawn in rural Texas, where roosters have been crowing since before her subdivision was a developer's wet dream. I tried diplomacy first, brought over Sarah's famous jalapeno beef jerky when they moved in, offered to help with their landscaping. Sarah always said you catch more flies with honey. Big mistake. Brenda interpreted neighborly gestures as admissions of guilt. Then came the escalation campaign. My irrigation system was suddenly contaminating their decorative pond. My cattle trucks created safety hazards for their jogging groups. She demanded I install privacy screening because ranch equipment was incompatible with property values. When Sarah got diagnosed with cancer in 2020, you'd think even Brenda would show basic human decency. Wrong. While I was driving Sarah to chemo treatments at MD Anderson 3 times a week, Brenda hired her brother-in-law Marcus to resurvey our property boundaries. Magically, my fence was now encroaching 15 feet into community space. Never mind those survey markers had been there since Eisenhower was president. The morning Sarah died, February 14, 2021, I found Brenda's note taped to my mailbox. Condolences on your loss. Please address the fence encroachment issue promptly to avoid legal action. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth that morning, and it wasn't the beans. While I was drowning in grief, learning to cook meals for one and sleeping in an empty bed, Brenda got bolder, started bringing nature groups onto my trail without permission, posted official-looking signs renaming it Riverside Heritage Path, even organized a charity 5K that trampled through my cattle operation. But this morning's fence destruction? That crossed every line imaginable. 2 weeks after the fence destruction, Brenda made her next move. And this woman had the subtlety of a freight train with twice the destructive power. I'm out checking cattle one crisp October morning when I spot some guy in an orange vest poking around my property corners with electronic equipment. The crunch of gravel under my boots echoed as I walked over to investigate. "Morning. You working for the county?" The guy looked nervous, sweating despite the cool air. No sir, hired by the HOA, just checking some boundary discrepancies." That's when I noticed the magnetic sign on his truck. Marcus Hendley, licensed surveyor. Same last name as Brenda's maiden name. What are the odds? I watched Marcus work for about an hour, and what I saw made my blood boil. This fool was actually moving my corner markers, not by accident, deliberately. He'd locate my original survey stones, then plant new ones 15 feet closer to my house. Each time he'd make a big show of using GPS, shaking his head like the century-old markers were obviously wrong. "Excuse me, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Those stones you're relocating? My great-grandfather placed those in 1924. They've been verified by 3 county surveys since." Marcus wiped sweat with a dirty handkerchief. "GPS technology is much more accurate now, sir. These old markers are way off." "Off by exactly the amount Brenda needs to steal my land?" He packed up faster than a spooked cat and was gone in 5 minutes. 3 days later, I woke to Brenda's landscaping crew planting an elaborate flower garden exactly where my property line used to be. Thousands of dollars worth of ornamental shrubs, decorative fencing, and fancy irrigation with pop-up sprinklers. The smell of fresh mulch and expensive fertilizer hung thick in the morning air. "Beautiful improvement to the community space, don't you think?" Brenda called out, directing operations like some suburban Napoleon. "That's my property you're landscaping. Not according to the new survey." She waved official-looking papers. "Turns out your fence has been encroaching on HOA common area for years. We're just reclaiming what was always ours." Most people would have lost their temper, started yelling, maybe thrown punches. But grief had taught me patience, and Sarah always said revenge is best served ice cold. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. Every angle, every detail, every smug expression on Brenda's face as she posed next to her stolen garden. "Getting this for your scrapbook, Jake?" She actually giggled. "Something like that." That afternoon I drove to the county courthouse, 40 minutes each way, but worth every mile. See, back when I was researching easement laws after Sarah died, I'd learned something most people don't know. Original property surveys are public records stored in county deed rooms, and accessing them costs under $50 in filing fees. Anyone can walk in and request certified copies of historical boundary documentation. What I found in those dusty filing cabinets was pure gold. My great-grandfather hadn't just randomly placed those survey stones. He'd hired a licensed surveyor in 1924, Hamilton Rhodes, who kept meticulous records. Every measurement, angle, and landmark documented with Swiss watch precision. More importantly, Rhodes had photographed each corner marker and filed those photos with the county. But here's the beautiful part. Rhodes hadn't used regular stones. He'd embedded small metal discs in each marker with unique identification numbers, all recorded in county archives and never changed. I hired my own surveyor the next day, Roy Hendricks, a crusty old-timer with 30 years experience and zero tolerance for fraud. Roy brought metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and enough attitude to intimidate a rattlesnake. "Let's see what this Marcus character was trying to hide," Roy muttered, firing up his equipment. It took exactly 3 hours to find every original marker, buried 6 inches under Marcus's fakes. But Roy's discovery went way beyond just proving the survey fraud. "Well, I'll be damned," Roy chuckled, checking his measurements twice. "Jake, you see that fancy entrance sign Brenda's so proud of? I looked across at the massive brick Riverside Estates monument with its LED lighting and carved stone lettering. That whole thing sits on your property, 3 feet over the line to be exact. My heart started racing. Brenda hadn't just stolen my land. She'd accidentally given me leverage over their entire entrance. The main gateway every resident used daily was technically trespassing on my property. I filed an adverse possession claim on that entrance strip the next morning. Didn't announce it, didn't make threats. Just let it sit in county records like a ticking time bomb. Brenda thought she'd won the first battle. She had no idea she'd just handed me the keys to her kingdom. The taste of victory was starting to sweeten my morning coffee again. Brenda's next attack hit me where it hurt most, my water. November brought that crisp Texas chill that makes cattle cluster for warmth. I was checking irrigation lines one morning when I discovered my main water feed to the north pasture. The line that had run under HOA property since 1987. Was bone dry. The metallic taste of panic flooded my mouth as I traced the pipe toward Riverside Estates. What I found made my blood boil. A backhoe sat parked over my severed irrigation line, its bucket still caked with chunks of destroyed PVC pipe. Muddy water pooled around the cut, and the smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the earthy scent of torn-up ground. "Oops!" Brenda's voice rang out behind me, dripping with fake concern. "Looks like we found some unauthorized infrastructure during our pond expansion project." She stood there, arms crossed, wearing that same victorious smirk she'd had while filming my fence destruction. "That's a legal easement, Brenda, filed and documented since 1987. She waved another folder of official papers. "Our insurance company can't cover damages from illegal water infrastructure. You'll need to relocate your pipes to your own property." This wasn't just irrigation, this was survival. That water fed the pasture supporting 50 head of cattle during rotation cycles. Without it, I'd lose grazing capacity that meant the difference between profit and bankruptcy. "What's the damage?" I asked, dreading the answer. $8,000 should cover proper relocation and permitting. Her smile could have frozen hellfire. "We're being generous considering the liability. $8,000 I didn't have. For water rights my family had held 35 years. But Brenda made a critical error while explaining her generosity. She kept talking as her crew dumped leftover pond chemicals directly into Miller Creek, the same waterway that flowed through my ranch before reaching 3 downstream neighborhoods. I started filming everything. The cut pipe, the chemical dumping, her crew's complete disregard for environmental protocols. That night, I researched water law online, building on knowledge I'd gained during those sleepless months after Sarah's diagnosis. What I'd learned back then was paying dividends now. Texas water rights are sacred, and interfering with established easements carries serious penalties. I also discovered something juicy about Brenda's backyard paradise. Her pool and spa setup violated county setback requirements by 4 feet, and the filtration runoff dumped chlorinated water straight into Miller Creek, the same creek her crew was now contaminating with industrial chemicals. The next morning I filed complaints with both the Brazos River Authority and County Environmental Department. Then I deployed my secret weapons, cellular game cameras. Sarah used to tease me about being a gadget freak, and after she died, Amazon deliveries became therapy. These weren't ordinary trail cameras. They were military-grade units with night vision and cellular upload, motion-activated, weatherproof, and completely covert. I positioned them around my irrigation system and along Miller Creek, where the dumping was happening. 3 days later at 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with motion alerts. The footage was absolutely damning. 2 landscaping trucks dumping fertilizer and pool chemicals directly into the creek. No protective gear, no containment, just straight environmental crime under cover of darkness. But the real jackpot came a week later, when my cameras caught Brenda herself directing the midnight dumping operation. Crystal clear footage of the HOA president pointing out specific dumping spots while her crew poisoned the watershed. I immediately forwarded everything to the EPA. Here's something most people don't know from my research after Sarah got sick. Environmental violations become federal crimes when they affect interstate waterways. Miller Creek feeds the Brazos River system, making this EPA jurisdiction. We're talking $50,000 fines per violation and potential criminal charges for deliberate contamination. The irony was beautiful. Brenda was poisoning water that flowed right back to her own neighbors. Within days, my irrigation was mysteriously restored. The HOA's insurance suddenly found coverage for pre-existing infrastructure maintenance. Amazing how quickly things get fixed when federal investigators start making calls. But the real victory came when my phone rang at dinner time. "Jake, this is Bob Christoph, retired Marine, live downstream from your place. We need to talk about our mutual Brenda problem." Turns out 3 families in Bob's neighborhood had gotten sick from contaminated creek water, and his military training taught him to investigate when something stank, literally. The chemical smell from Miller Creek was making people nauseous. "I've been documenting everything," Bob said, his voice carrying that calm authority you only hear from career military. "And I know others who'd love to compare notes about HOA overreach." That's when it hit me. Brenda hadn't just picked a fight with one grieving rancher. She'd declared war on an entire community of people who were fed up with her suburban dictatorship. I was no longer fighting alone. The sound of my cattle peacefully drinking from clean water that evening was sweeter than any music I'd heard since Sarah died. December brought a cold snap that froze water troughs solid, and Brenda's most audacious power play yet. She decided to lock me out of my own land entirely. I was heading out for morning cattle checks when I found a massive automated gate blocking my access road. Not some flimsy chain-link barrier. This was commercial-grade steel with electronic keypads, security cameras, and enough LED lighting to land aircraft. A brand new sign proclaimed, "Riverside Estates, residents only, security upgrade complete." The crunch of frost-covered gravel under my boots echoed in the morning silence as I stood there staring at this fortress gate blocking my century-old family trail. "Morning, Jake." Brenda's voice rang out from her kitchen window. She opened it wide, steam from her expensive coffee curling into the cold air. "Love the new security features, don't you?" "This blocks my legal easement, Brenda." "Not anymore." She waved official-looking papers like victory flags. "County Safety Inspector declared your old access agreement void due to liability issues. Public roads only from now on." Public roads meant a 12-mile detour around county highways to reach my north pasture. 12 miles that turned 5-minute cattle checks into hour-long expeditions. 12 miles that made emergency vet calls nearly impossible during calving season. "But don't worry," she continued, her voice dripping fake sweetness. "We're reasonable people. Local farmers can purchase monthly access passes for just $50. Very affordable. $50 to use the trail my great-grandfather carved in 1924. The sheer audacity made my teeth ache. While Brenda was busy explaining her toll road scheme, I was photographing everything. The gate specs, her paperwork, and most importantly, the installation work order someone had carelessly left on their truck hood. That afternoon I made another courthouse trip. But this time, I wasn't going alone. Emma was home for winter break, and my daughter's paralegal coursework at A&M was about to pay dividends. "Dad, let me handle the research," she'd insisted that morning. "You taught me to read land grants when I was 12. Time to put that education to work." What Emma discovered in those musty county records was absolutely nuclear. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement as she pulled out a thick folder. "You need to see this. The 1924 original land grant doesn't just mention cattle trail access." I leaned over the document table as she spread out photocopies of my great-grandfather's original deed. "Look at this clause," Emma pointed to faded, typewritten text. "Grantor retains perpetual easement rights to all roadways, pathways, and access routes carved from original ranch property for agricultural and family use in perpetuity." My hands started shaking as I read the legal language. What exactly does that mean? It means every road in Riverside Estates was built on easements you still own. The developer bought building rights in 2018, but he never acquired road ownership. Those rights stayed with the Whitmore family trust that great-grandfather established. The implications hit me like a physical blow. I didn't just have access rights to their roads, I owned them. "Emma, are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that Brenda's entire HOA has been driving on your property without permission for 5 years. Every resident, every delivery truck, every HOA maintenance crew has been trespassing." The musty smell of old documents suddenly smelled like victory. We spent the next hour tracing property boundaries and road layouts. Emma's fresh eyes caught details I'd missed, her legal training helping interpret the archaic language of 1920s land grants. Dad, look at this. She showed me a hand-drawn map from 1924. Great-grandfather didn't just own the ranch. He owned the road network connecting it to the county highway. When he sold parcels off over the decades, he specifically retained road ownership through the trust. That evening, I hired Roy Hendricks for another survey, this time focusing exclusively on road boundaries. What Roy found the next day was even better than Emma's research suggested. "Jake, every road marker confirms your ownership," Roy said, showing me GPS readings on his tablet. "But here's the kicker. That new gate is installed dead center on your easement. They just put a $15,000 security system on your property without asking." The irony was delicious. Brenda had spent HOA money to install a gate on land she didn't own to block access to roads she didn't control. But I kept this nuclear information to myself. Instead of revealing my ace card, I decided to let Brenda dig deeper. I started documenting every vehicle using my roads, photographing license plates, timing traffic patterns, calculating usage fees at commercial rates. Meanwhile, I made that 12-mile detour every morning, documenting mileage and time delays while building a damages case. The taste of those longer morning drives was bitter, but every mile reminded me that Brenda had unknowingly handed me complete control over her subdivision. I wasn't just planning to get my access back. I was planning to become her landlord. The sound of my truck engine warming up each dawn began feeling less like frustration and more like a countdown to the most satisfying property dispute in Texas history. January's bitter cold had me and Emma huddled around the kitchen table, sorting through decades of family documents. My daughter was home from A&M for winter break, and her paralegal training was proving invaluable as we organized our case against Brenda. "Dad, what's this?" Emma held up a yellowed envelope I'd never seen before, found tucked inside my great-grandfather's old Bible. The return address read, Hamilton County Legal Trust, 1924. Inside was a single sheet of paper so fragile it felt like tissue. The letterhead was barely legible, but Emma's young eyes could make out what mine couldn't. "Oh my God," she whispered, her face going pale. "What is it?" "Dad, sit down." The smell of old paper and fear sweat filled the kitchen as Emma carefully spread the document on the table. "This is the original Whitmore family trust charter. Great-grandfather didn't just own the ranch, he established a legal trust that retained control over every piece of infrastructure built on the original property, forever." My hands trembled as I tried to read the faded typewriting. "What does that mean in English?" Emma's voice got stronger as the implications hit her. "It means every road, every water line, every electrical connection in Riverside Estates is legally trust property. The developer bought surface rights in 2018, but the infrastructure ownership never transferred." The kitchen seemed to spin around me. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying Brenda doesn't just not own the roads. She doesn't control the water, the electricity, the sewer systems, nothing. The entire subdivision's lifeline runs through property you control." My coffee mug slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the floor with a sound like gunfire. Emma was already pulling up documents on her laptop, cross-referencing property records with utility maps. "Dad, look at this. Every single utility easement in Riverside Estates traces back to the original trust boundaries. They've been operating for 5 years without any legal authority whatsoever." The magnitude hit me like a physical blow. I didn't just own roads. I controlled the infrastructure that kept 200 families' lives functioning. "But there's more," Emma continued, her voice tight with excitement and disbelief. "I found their financial records online. They've collected over $600,000 in infrastructure maintenance fees over 5 years. But look where the money actually went." She showed me a spreadsheet she'd compiled, contract after contract awarded to Dale's construction company without competitive bidding. Mysterious emergency repairs that cost triple the normal rate. Shell companies with Brenda's relatives listed as officers. They're not just squatting on trust property, Dad. They're running a massive embezzlement scheme while they do it. The taste of copper filled my mouth as I realized what this meant. Every road improvement, every utility upgrade, every community enhancement Brenda had approved was illegal construction on my property, funded by money stolen from her own neighbors. "Emma, if this is true, it's all true. I verified everything through county records." Her eyes blazed with righteous anger. "Brenda's been playing queen of a kingdom she never owned, charging her subjects for improvements to someone else's land. That evening, I stood on my porch, staring across at the warm lights of Riverside Estates, knowing I held the power to turn every one of them dark. Those families celebrating inside their cozy homes had no idea their entire lifestyle depended on the goodwill of the crazy rancher their HOA president had been tormenting. Brenda thought she'd been winning a property dispute. What she'd actually been doing was building her entire empire on land controlled by the enemy. The January wind carried the sound of children laughing in backyards that technically belonged to me. Soon, those laughs would turn to very different sounds, because tomorrow, I was going to start exercising my rights as the most powerful landlord in Texas. The next morning, I woke up with a plan so audacious it made my hands shake while I poured coffee. Time to assemble a team. First call, Roy Hendricks. Roy, I need the most comprehensive property survey you've ever done. Document every road marker, every utility line, every square inch like we're going to the Supreme Court. Timeline? How about yesterday? Roy's gravelly laugh crackled through the phone. Jake, after what Brenda put you through, I'd work weekends for free. Give me 3 days. Second call. Patricia Vance, the property attorney who'd handled Sarah's will. Patricia, hypothetically, what happens when someone discovers they own all the roads in an HOA subdivision? Dead silence. Then, Jake Whitmore, please tell me you're about to make my year. Patricia's office smelled like leather and justice when I showed up with Emma's trust documents. Her eyes lit up as she read through the 1924 papers. This is legally bulletproof, she said, practically bouncing in her chair. You have absolute authority to control access, require permits, or restrict usage entirely. It's your property. What about the innocent residents? That's where strategy matters. You can implement maintenance closures for safety, require usage agreements, or invoice for unauthorized access, all perfectly legal. She explained that I could also pursue back rent for 5 years of unauthorized usage. Commercial road rates in Texas? About $200 per vehicle monthly. Quick math. 200 houses, 400 cars, 5 years. We were looking at $2.4 million in unpaid fees. The taste of victory was getting sweeter by the hour. Third call, Bob Christoph. Bob, want to help me execute the most satisfying property enforcement in Texas history? Jake, I've been waiting for this call since that creek contamination nonsense. What do you need? Bob's kitchen table became our war room. Maps of Riverside Estates spread across the surface like invasion plans, which basically they were. 7 access points, Bob said, his military precision showing. Control these choke points, control the entire subdivision. He'd already researched road closure procedures during his own Brenda battles. Professional barriers, proper signage, advance notice. Do it right, nobody can touch you. The smell of Bob's black coffee mixed with the musty scent of old property maps as we planned each detail. That afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Emma burst into Bob's kitchen, looking panicked. Dad, we have a problem. I just saw Brenda's car at the courthouse. My blood chilled. What's she doing there? Could be researching property records. Maybe she's finally figuring out the trust situation. Bob stood up, every inch the career Marine. Then we accelerate the timeline. How fast can we get those barriers? My construction buddy owes me a favor, Bob said, already reaching for his phone. I can have DOT-approved road barriers here by tonight. This was turning into a race against time. If Brenda discovered the trust ownership before we acted, she'd find ways to muddy the legal waters or create complications. Emma took charge of documentation, while Bob coordinated equipment. I'll prepare resident notification packets, she said. Usage agreements, legal explanations, payment options. Make this as smooth as possible for innocent families. Patricia worked on official notices, formal demands to the HOA, cease and desist orders, and legal justification for access restrictions. Everything has to be perfect, she stressed. One procedural mistake, and Brenda will exploit it. By evening, Bob's friend had delivered 7 professional road barriers with reflective signs reading, "Private property, maintenance in progress, contact Whitmore Property Trust for access." These aren't toys, Bob explained as we examined the steel barriers. DOT approved, legally compliant, absolutely enforceable. Emma had created information packets for each household, explaining the situation. Their HOA had been operating on private property without permission, but legitimate access agreements were available through proper channels. The goal isn't to hurt people, Emma emphasized. It's to expose Brenda's fraud while giving families legal options. Patricia had prepared all the legal ammunition: property ownership documentation, usage violation notices, and formal demands for 5 years of back rent from the HOA. "Tomorrow morning you become the most powerful landlord in Texas," Patricia said with satisfaction. "Brenda's about to learn she's been playing queen in someone else's castle." That night I couldn't sleep, kept walking to the window, staring across at Riverside Estates, knowing that by dawn I'd control every entrance and exit to Brenda's little kingdom. The winter wind carried sounds of normal suburban evening routines: garage doors closing, dogs barking, families settling in for the night. By tomorrow evening, those sounds would be very different. Emma found me at the kitchen window around midnight. "Having second thoughts, Dad?" "Just thinking about your mom. She always said the best revenge is living well. Mom also said sometimes you have to fight bullies to protect other people." Emma squeezed my shoulder. "This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about justice." The clock ticked toward dawn, and toward the moment when Brenda Maxworth would discover that her suburban empire had always belonged to the enemy. Dawn broke crisp and clear as Bob and I positioned the first road barrier at Riverside Estate's main entrance. The metallic clang of steel hitting asphalt echoed through the morning stillness like a funeral bell for Brenda's kingdom. We'd barely finished the second barrier when my phone exploded with angry texts. "What the hell? You can't do this. This is illegal." At 7:30 a.m. sharp, the call I'd been expecting came through. "Jake Whitmore!" Brenda's voice was so shrill, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Remove those barricades right now, or I'm calling the sheriff." "Morning, Brenda. Beautiful day for property maintenance." "This is harassment, intimidation. You can't block public roads." The smell of her panic practically oozed through the phone. "Actually, I can. They're my roads. Check the 1924 land grants if you don't believe me." Dead silence. Then, "That's impossible. We've maintained these roads for 5 years. With my permission, which I'm now revoking. Have a blessed day." I hung up and turned to Bob, who was adjusting barrier reflectors with military precision. "How long before the meltdown?" "Based on previous unstable commanders I've encountered, 20 minutes max." He was optimistic. It took 8 minutes. Brenda's Mercedes came screaming around the corner, tires squealing as she slammed the brakes. She burst out wearing pajamas and fuzzy slippers, her hair looking like she'd been electrocuted. "Move these now!" she shrieked, actually trying to lift a 200-pound steel barrier with her bare hands. "Ma'am, please contact the Property Trust for access authorization," Bob said calmly, pointing to our official signage. "Property Trust? I'm the HOA president." "Not of my property," I replied, walking over with legal documents. "Care to review the paperwork?" Brenda's face cycled through colors I didn't know human skin could achieve. That's when she made her fatal error. "Dale!" she screamed into her phone. "Bring the backhoe. We're tearing down these illegal obstacles." 20 minutes later, Dale arrived with construction equipment, looking confused and seriously regretting his life choices. The diesel exhaust mixed with the scent of Brenda's desperation as he climbed out. "Honey, these look like official county barriers. They're illegal. Destroy them." Bob stepped forward, every inch the career military officer. "Sir, I'm retired MP. Those barriers are legally installed on private property. Removing them constitutes criminal destruction of property." Dale looked between his psychotic wife and Bob's calm authority, clearly weighing his options. The backhoe drove away while Brenda screamed at the retreating equipment. But here's where Brenda's desperation got creative. If she couldn't destroy the barriers, she'd destroy me. By noon, reporters were calling. Someone had fed local media a story about a deranged rancher terrorizing innocent families with illegal road blockades. The first TV crew arrived at 1 p.m., and I was ready. "Mr. Whitmore, residents say you're holding families hostage," the reporter said, shoving a microphone in my face. "I'm exercising legal property rights," I replied, handing her trust documentation. "This subdivision has used my roads without permission for 5 years. I'm requiring proper authorization." But then came the mini twist that changed everything. Actually, the reporter said, scanning the documents. "We've been investigating HOA financial irregularities in this area. Would you be willing to discuss on camera the fees you've been charged for road usage?" My heart skipped. Charged? I own these roads. I should be charging them. The reporter's eyes lit up. "So you're saying the HOA has been collecting road maintenance fees for property they don't own?" That's when I realized Brenda's media strategy had just backfired spectacularly. Instead of painting me as the villain, she'd handed investigative reporters a corruption story on a silver platter. "We'd like to interview you about financial fraud in suburban HOA management," the reporter continued. "Our research shows this isn't isolated to your community." Within hours, the story had shifted from "crazy rancher blocks roads" to a president charged fees for roads she didn't own. Local news was running segments about suburban corruption and property rights violations. But Brenda wasn't finished. That evening, my security cameras caught her sneaking around the barriers at 2 a.m., dressed in black like some suburban commando. She wasn't trying to remove the barriers. She was installing something. The next morning, Bob and I discovered her sabotage. Fake, condemned property, unsafe conditions signs, attached to our legitimate barriers, made to look like county health department notices. "She's trying to make us look like we're blocking access to condemned buildings," Bob realized. "Make residents think the barriers are protecting them from us, not enforcing our property rights." The taste of coffee turned bitter as I realized how devious this move was. Residents would see official-looking condemnation notices and assume we were the problem, not Brenda. But two could play the fake signage game. That afternoon, we installed our own additional signs. Unauthorized usage of private property, 5 years back rent owed, contact legal department. Let the neighbors do the math on what 5 years of unpaid road usage might cost them. 3 days into the road closure, Brenda crossed the line from desperate to dangerous. I was checking my cattle that morning when Emma called, her voice tight with worry. "Dad, you need to see this. Brenda's lost her mind completely." She'd posted a video on the neighborhood Facebook page that made her previous rants look sane by comparison. There was Brenda, standing in front of our road barriers at dawn, makeup smeared like she'd been crying all night. "This terrorist rancher is starving innocent families," she declared to her phone camera. "Children can't get to school. Elderly residents can't reach their doctors. Jake Whitmore is holding us hostage because he wants to steal our homes." The smell of fresh hay should have been calming, but watching Brenda's complete breakdown made my stomach churn with unease. "But I have proof," she continued, waving papers wildly. "Proof that Jake Whitmore has been planning this attack for months, planning to destroy our community and force us all to sell." Emma's voice crackled through my phone. "Dad, she's claiming you've been secretly buying up properties to create some kind of ranch empire. Says you threatened her personally." That's when I knew Brenda had moved from harassment into criminal territory. By noon, Sheriff Deputy Martinez was knocking on my door. Tom Martinez had known my family for 20 years, and his expression was apologetic as he showed me the formal complaint. "Jake, I've got to ask about some allegations. Mrs. Maxworth claims you've made verbal threats about destroying the neighborhood. Tom, you know me better than that." "I do, but I've got to investigate. She's also claiming you've been trespassing on HOA property to plant surveillance equipment." The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brenda was accusing me of trespassing on property that I actually owned. "Want to see the property deeds?" I asked, pulling out Patricia's legal folder. Tom's eyebrows climbed as he reviewed the trust documentation. "Jesus, Jake, you own all their roads?" "Every inch. Has for 99 years. And she's been charging people maintenance fees for your property? $600,000 worth over 5 years. Tom whistled low. "That's not a property dispute. That's fraud." But Brenda wasn't done escalating. That afternoon brought her most desperate gambit yet. A black SUV pulled into my driveway around 3 p.m. So you're offering me cash to ignore 5 years of illegal property usage and fraud? This is a legitimate settlement offer. This is attempted bribery. I kept filming as Marcus realized his mistake, and that money probably came from HOA emergency funds that Brenda embezzled. Marcus packed up faster than Dale had fled with his backhoe. But the real explosion came that evening. Bob called around 10 p.m., his voice grim. "Jake, you need to get over here. Brenda's organizing some kind of mob." I drove to the main entrance and found chaos. 40 or 50 residents had gathered around our barriers, led by a wild-eyed Brenda who was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "This is our neighborhood," she was shouting to the crowd. "We can't let one selfish rancher destroy our property values." The smell of cigarette smoke and angry sweat hung thick in the night air as residents shouted questions and complaints. "What about our children's school buses? My mother needs dialysis treatments. This is illegal imprisonment." But then Mrs. Henry, the retired teacher I'd met months ago, stepped forward with a folder in her hands. "Actually," she said in the clear voice of someone used to commanding classrooms, "I've been researching our HOA finances. Has anyone else wondered where our reserve fund disappeared to?" The crowd quieted as Mrs. Henry spread documents on the hood of someone's car. "We should have $340,000 in emergency reserves, but according to bank statements I requested under state transparency laws, we have less than $12,000. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as residents realized they'd been focused on the wrong villain. "Furthermore," Mrs. Henry continued, "I've discovered that every road maintenance contract for the past 3 years was awarded without competitive bidding to companies owned by board members' relatives." Brenda's face went white as her own neighbors started turning toward her with very different expressions. "That's lies. Slander. She's working with him." Brenda pointed at me like I was personally responsible for Mrs. Henry's mathematics. But the damage was done. Residents were pulling out phones, taking pictures of Mrs. Henry's financial documents, asking questions Brenda couldn't answer. That's when Brenda made her final mistake. "You want to know the truth?" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I've been protecting you from him. He's been planning to shut down this whole neighborhood for years." The crowd fell silent, waiting. I had to take some emergency funds to fight his legal attacks. Everything I did was to save our community. And there it was, a full confession of embezzlement, recorded on a dozen phones, witnessed by 50 neighbors. The town hall meeting the next evening packed the Millfield Community Center beyond capacity. Word had spread fast about Brenda's public confession, and everyone wanted front-row seats to the suburban apocalypse. I arrived early with Bob, Emma, and Patricia, carrying boxes of evidence like we were preparing for the trial of the century. The smell of folding chairs and nervous sweat filled the room as residents filed in, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anger, and embarrassment. Mayor Davidson reluctantly took the podium, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "We're here to address the ongoing dispute between the Riverside Estates HOA and Mr. Jake Whitmore regarding property access rights." Brenda entered like she was walking into her own execution. Dale had apparently decided his construction business was more important than his marriage. He was notably absent. She sat alone in the front row, clutching a folder of papers and wearing the expression of someone who knew the walls were closing in. "Mr. Whitmore, would you like to present your position first?" I stood up, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Thank you, Mayor Davidson. I think it's easier to show rather than tell." Emma had prepared a presentation that would make law school professors proud. The first slide showed the 1924 original land grant, with our family name clearly visible. My great-grandfather established the Whitmore Family Trust in 1924, retaining ownership of all roadways and infrastructure on what's now Riverside Estates property. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as residents realized the implications. "The developer who built your subdivision purchased surface building rights, but never acquired road ownership. For 5 years, your HOA has been operating on property they don't control, collecting fees for maintaining roads they don't own." The next slide showed financial records Mrs. Henry had compiled. This $100,000 in road maintenance fees collected for property belonging to our family trust. "That's a lie." Brenda jumped to her feet, her voice cracking. "Those documents are forged. He's been planning this attack for years." Actually, I said calmly, I have something that might interest everyone. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projection system. This is security footage from last night's gathering at the main entrance. The room fell silent as Brenda's own voice filled the speakers. I had to take some emergency funds to fight his legal attacks. Everything I did was to save our community. The mayor's face went pale as he watched Brenda's public confession play out in crystal clear video. So let me understand, Mayor Davidson said slowly. You've been collecting fees for road maintenance on property you don't own, while embezzling HOA funds to pay for legal battles against the actual property owner. I was protecting the community, Brenda screamed, her composure completely shattered. He wants to destroy everything we've built. That's when Patricia Vance stood up, and I knew the coup de grace was coming. Your Honor, Patricia addressed the mayor formally, I represent the Whitmore Family Trust. We're prepared to offer all residents legitimate access agreements at reasonable rates, $50 per household monthly, far below commercial road usage fees. Furthermore, she continued, we're willing to waive all back rent and usage fees in exchange for proper HOA reformation, with legitimate leadership and transparent financial management. The room erupted as residents realized they had a path forward that didn't involve bankruptcy or homelessness. All we require, Patricia concluded, is the immediate resignation of current HOA leadership and cooperation with ongoing criminal investigations into financial fraud. That's when Sheriff Deputy Martinez stepped forward from the back of the room, his hand resting on his handcuffs. Mrs. Maxworth, you're under arrest for embezzlement of HOA funds, fraud, and filing false police reports. The room fell dead silent as Martinez read Brenda her rights while she sobbed hysterically. This is illegal. I'm the victim here. He's destroying our community. But her neighbors were no longer listening. They were already pulling out phones, taking pictures of the legal documents Emma was distributing, asking questions about the legitimate access agreements. Mr. Whitmore, called out Bob Martinez, one of the affected residents, if we sign these usage agreements, our road access is guaranteed. Absolutely. The trust wants good neighbors, not conflict. We're offering 99-year agreements at rates lower than your current HOA fees. Mrs. Henry raised her hand. What about the missing reserve funds? That's between law enforcement and Mrs. Maxworth, I replied. But the trust is prepared to provide emergency road maintenance immediately while the legal issues are resolved. As Martinez led Brenda away in handcuffs, she turned back to the crowd with one final scream. You'll regret this, all of you. When he controls everything, you'll remember that I tried to protect you. But the only sounds that followed were residents lining up to sign access agreements and asking Emma questions about proper HOA governance. The taste of justice was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined. Walking out of that community center, with legitimate agreements signed and Brenda headed for jail, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's diagnosis. Complete peace. The sound of my truck starting up for the short drive home was the sound of victory, rolling on wheels I'd always owned. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my porch watching the most beautiful sight in Texas, a neighborhood that actually works. The legal aftermath was swift and satisfying. Brenda was convicted of embezzlement, fraud, and filing false police reports, earning herself 6 years in federal prison and a restitution order for $847,000. Dale lost his contractor's license and faces his own fraud charges. 3 other HOA board members took plea deals for lesser involvement. But the real victory was what happened next. Riverside Estates voted 187-8 to dissolve their corrupt HOA and establish a legitimate property owners association, with Mrs. Henry as treasurer, Bob Christoph handling security issues, and Emma serving as legal advisor while she finishes law school. The new POA operates on a simple principle: transparency in everything. Monthly budgets posted online, all contracts put out for competitive bid, and every major decision requires homeowner approval. Their annual operating costs dropped by 60% once they eliminated the corruption and kickback schemes. My usage agreements turned out to be the best deal anyone could have asked for. $50 monthly per household covers road maintenance, snow removal, and basic infrastructure upkeep. Compare that to the $200 plus monthly fees Brenda was charging for non-existent services, and every resident is saving money. More importantly, we've created something Sarah would have loved: a real community. The Sarah Whitmore Memorial Fund, established with my legal settlement money, has become the gold standard for fighting HOA abuse nationwide. We've provided free legal aid to 89 families across Texas, helped expose corruption in 12 other communities, and partnered with law schools to create a HOA victims' rights clinic. Emma graduated summa cum laude last month and passed the bar exam on her first try. She's opening her practice right here in Millfield, specializing in property rights and HOA reform. Her first case involves a subdivision in Dallas, where the HOA president has been charging residents for pool maintenance on a pool that doesn't exist. The ripple effects have been extraordinary. Texas passed the Whitmore Act last session, requiring annual independent audits of all HOA finances and mandating transparency in property ownership and easement rights. Similar legislation is pending in 7 other states. Property values in Riverside estates have increased 23% since establishing legitimate governance. Turns out people actually want to live in neighborhoods where they know their money isn't being stolen and their property rights are respected. But the personal healing has been just as important as the legal victories. Mrs. Henry and I have become close friends, bonding over our shared love of exposing financial fraud and teaching people their rights. Bob and I take monthly fishing trips where we swap stories about dealing with corrupt authority figures. His military experience and my ranching patience make a formidable combination. The neighborhood kids have adopted my ranch as their unofficial nature preserve. I've taught a dozen children how to properly approach cattle, identify native plants, and understand the history carved into this land. Their laughter echoes across pastures where my great-grandfather once struggled just to survive. Every morning, I visit Sarah's grave to share the day's small victories. "The creek's running clear again," I tell her headstone. "The kids caught fireflies in the north pasture last night. The community you always wanted us to have is finally here." The fence Brenda destroyed has been rebuilt stronger than ever, using oak from trees that grew on trust property. But now it stands as a symbol of cooperation rather than conflict. The gate bears a bronze plaque reading, "Sarah Whitmore Memorial Trail, a community built on honesty and transparency." Last week, a documentary crew from Austin finished filming Fencing Out Corruption, which will air next month on PBS. They wanted to focus on the David versus Goliath angle, but I kept redirecting them to the real story, how ordinary people can fight back against abuse when they know their rights and stand together. The morning coffee tastes sweeter these days, especially when I'm drinking it while watching my cattle graze peacefully in pastures that my family has protected for a century. The sound of children playing in yards where their parents no longer fear arbitrary fines or corrupt leadership is better than any symphony.
Jack Whitmore sits on his porch looking at roads his family owned since 1924. Funny thing is, maybe Brenda Maxwell did him a favor after all. 6 months after that morning she filmed herself bulldozing his fence, Jack's collected $1.4 million in settlements. But more important, he found purpose again after losing Sarah. The Sarah Whitmore Memorial Fund has now helped 127 families fight HOA abuse across America. Here's what I realized from Jack's story. Sometimes people think they are protecting the community, but they're really just protecting their own little slice of power. Brenda believed she was preserving property values when she tore down that fence. Truth is, she was just trying to hold on to control over a kingdom she never actually owned. Jack didn't win because he knew how to fight. He won because he knew how to read property deeds. While Brenda charged into battle unprepared, Jack spent months researching every document, every clause dating back to 1924. Patience beats passion every single time. You ever wonder what your HOA actually owns? Or do you just take their word for it? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever checked your own property deeds to see what rights you actually have? If the story makes you want to dig into land ownership records, hit the like button. Subscribe for more stories about regular folks beating people in power. And share this with your neighbors. because everyone needs to know that legal paperwork beats the loudest voice in the room.